Thanks so much for your time. I am Pius Kojobaka, and we want to talk about trade matters because Ghana continues to export more than what it imports since last year. This according to the second quarter trade statistics released by the Ghana Statistical Service. However, China remains the country's primary source of imports, contributing about 12.3 billion cedis of total imports. The report showed the value recorded from April to June this year declined marginally to 5.4 billion cedis. This also marks a substantial reversal in terms of what the country recorded in the first half of 2023. More in this report.
The latest report from the Ghana Statistical Service on trade activities for the second quarter of 2024 indicates Asia remains the largest contributor to the country's imports, contributing over half, and also the country's exports.
In the second quarter 2024, the total trade value was 123 billion Ghana cedis, comprising 64.2 billion in exports and 58.8 billion in imports. Trade surplus has been recorded for the third consecutive time, although the value was more than halved from 11.5 billion Ghana cedis to 5.4 billion Ghana cedis between the first two quarters of 2024. The dominance of gold as the main export commodity has been further consolidated with an increase in its share of about 10.0 percentage points, specifically from 47.5% to 57.6% between the second quarter of 2023 and the second quarter of 2024. The export value of cocoa product decreased by 4.0 billion Ghana cedis between the second quarter of 2024 and the first quarter of 2024.
The report also indicates the United Arab Emirates surpasses Switzerland as Ghana's main gold destination for the second quarter.
From a percentage point of view, for the fifth consecutive quarter, we see a decline in the export value of cocoa beans, with a current decline of 26.9% for the second quarter of 2024. We turn to export and import by continent. We continue to see the leading dominance of the Asian continent since the last quarter of 2024, when it surpassed the contribution from Europe. In the third quarter of 2023, Europe had a share of 37.7% relative to 32.1% for Asia. This was overturned in the last quarter of 2023, and this dominance of Asia has been recorded for both the first and second quarters of 2024.
Export value of cocoa products also decreased by 4 billion Ghana cedis from the first quarter to the second quarter of 2024. For Joy Business, James Ishen.
And I want us to have a conversation on the back of this trade report, and joining us via Zoom to do that is economist Professor Patrick Esuming. Thanks so much, Professor Esuming, for joining us on Business Live. Now, despite Ghana recording its third consecutive trade surplus, we are learning that quarter two numbers declined marginally to 5.4 billion cedis between April 2024 to June 2024. Is that surprising, you would say?
Good evening and good evening to viewers. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I think it's not too surprising, especially if you look at how the economy has evolved, especially in the second quarter. We know the growth has been high, but at the same time, we see, especially if you look at the export side, the Statistical Service GDP number shows that cocoa production was down upward of 20%, 26%, I believe, which is just about the same that the Statistical Service reported our decline in cocoa export. So in some sense, it's not too much of a decline. Now, I think if you begin to focus on the dollar values, then you actually see that our trade position has actually worsened. Don't forget that the cedi has lost value. So when things are converted into cedi, you see the chart showing that things are higher. But if you look at it in dollar terms, you realize that both exports and imports have kind of declined over the second quarter. So in the short term, our trade position is actually not looking that great.
All right, so it appears that cocoa indeed may have played a part in all of these for us weakness and the decline we are seeing in trade surpluses and so.
Absolutely. So I think the problem with cocoa is getting more and more serious. I think we already got since when the GDP numbers was released. And this data goes to confirm that we are still having problems. I think that the CD value, like I said before, the CD value looks stronger because the CD has lost the CD has lost value. So if you focus on the dollar equivalent, you see that it hasn't been that great. Yes, of course, in CD terms, the trade surplus seems to have expanded, but in dollar terms, not so much.
I see. But I'll come back to you on that so that we'll interrogate the dynamics in that aspect. But if you carefully look at the numbers, is there any link to claims that, well, the economy is showing signs of recovery, you would say again?
Well, I don't know about that. I think when we look at these trade statistics, we want to see evidence that we are diversifying our export base, because the gold increase, the increase in our gold export. Don't forget that new large gold mines have come on stream. So it's not like we are doing something extremely wonderful. That is why gold continues to record a lot. But if you look at a category like other exports, which is away from our non-traditional exports, you see that between this corresponding quarter this year and last year, the share has declined. That tells us that we are not really diversifying as we are supposed to. So if you look at figure 4 on the share of exports from various sources, you realize that the other exports, which mostly represent our non-traditional exports, they have declined. And then also you see that in terms of our exposure, our sources of export, or where we are exporting to, we really haven't diversified that as well. And then our sources of import, we are concentrating more of our import and export in the same countries, which poses a longer term risk. So we haven't seen the diversification that we want to see in terms of our exporting activity, and then also the kind of reduction in import that we want to see.
I then guess that it's not too early for us to be excited about the role of gold prices in all these trade numbers, as you've rightly articulated, because the outlook for the commodity is looking good as we speak.
Yeah, I think if you were to look at this for the third quarter, you realize that since June, gold prices have really been rising very steadily. It's been on a tear. So even if we are doing the same values, the same volumes, when we are looking at this for the third quarter, it will show us that things are better. But let's not be deceived. I think if the global prices are things that we don't control, what we can control is adding more value, and then also making sure that we are more diversified. And I think that's what we really want to see in the data.
And diversification is the key message you are putting across. But again, you get to see that, well, China accounts for our biggest imports, and UAE is now the major destination for our gold exports. How can we change that narrative?
I think it's not necessarily a problem. I mean, that we are getting a bigger share from a specific country. I think it's more a problem if you were to see more details of exactly what we are exporting, exactly what we are importing. So that if you are importing textiles and apparel from China, then that should give us more cause for worry. So, in the bigger frame of things, you see, China, in terms of development, they are closer to us than Western Europe and probably the US. So if you are importing things from China, and they are not things like cars or electronics, and they are consumer products, then there's a little bit more cause for concern, because we could also be doing well at light industrial manufacturing. So I think that kind of composition gives us more information about exactly where our economy is headed. If we saw that we are exporting more manufactured items, then that would be more helpful than just exporting cocoa and gold that are unprocessed. I think that's where the problem sits.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor Patrick Esumeng, for your inputs this very moment. We appreciate it. Away from that, let's talk about the IMF, because government says it remains optimistic of passing the third review. This should lead to the release of some $360 million by the IMF board in December this year to Ghana. Now, government sources are basing their optimism on preliminary data ending June this year, which shows it has met all the critical targets and key indicators. The IMF has been engaging government over how it has fared under the IMF program. Now, the third review, Joy Business understands, will be heavy on some of the structural reforms that government has undertaken under the program so far. My colleague George Yafe has the rest of the story.
An IMF team which started arriving in Ghana over the weekend are expected to open various rounds of meetings with government from today. The team is expected to be in Ghana for the next 2 weeks, with the engagement ending possibly on October 4, 2024. The Bank of Ghana will not be left out of this meeting, as there are some monetary issues that must be reviewed under the IMF program. However, prior to this visit, the IMF team from Washington, D.C., USA, had some virtual meetings with the central bank, so there's a likelihood that there'll be little engagement with the Bank of Ghana whilst the team is in town. We understand that the assessment will focus on 6 quantitative performance, 4 indicative targets, and 10 structural benchmarks. The fund will be reviewing all the economic and monetary data ending June this year. This will be the last assessment for the IMF program for 2024, as Ghana's program with the IMF is expected to end in April 2026.
Let's hear from the business community and the president of the Ghana National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Dr. Clement Asamoah, joins us via Zoom for their expectations. Thanks so much, Dr. Asamoah, for joining us on Business Live. Now, we are learning the team is now in town to review developments in the economy. As a business community, are you also optimistic, like government has said, well, it will pass the review test to aid the release of some $360 million?
Support have been very immense, and it shows that the economy has improved significantly. We have seen growth rate moving up to 4.7. We are also very optimistic that currently the exchange rate forex has been quite stable, though we were not able to handle it at the beginning of the year. Inflation has moved away from 53 point something to 20.4, showing significantly that the bailout has been very supportive. Besides the recent haircut, etc., that we did with our creditors has also been very fruitful. I believe that if we continue like that, the economy will come back to where it used to be. I think that the government, for once, have done very well, making sure that they are maximizing whatever funding that they have, not exclusively wasting much money on election. But I think that the finance minister have done well, being very prudent, the way he's carrying himself, the way forward. And I believe that it will boost the economy, it will bring confidence back, and then the exchange rate will be stable. So we are very optimistic that the bailout, I think that at the moment we are left with about 1.4, 1.7 has been dispersed. And that is being very good. Whatever comes to us as a result of the bailout, in addition to if we are getting the entire last tranche, then that will be so much good for the economy.
Again,
we are very optimistic, very hopeful.
All right, that's fine. But you would agree with me that, well, there are some structural challenges that have to be addressed, right?
Yeah.
Mr. Samuako, can you hear me? I am asking you to confirm whether indeed we are facing some structural challenges which ought to be addressed. You would agree with me on that? Rather unfortunate, Clement's line has frozen. We shall rectify that and bring him on as and when we do have him. Now, let's stay a while longer on the IMF, because the finance professor at Andrews University, Professor Williams Pipra, says government's inability to make some structural reforms of some policies as requested by the International Monetary Fund is likely to affect Ghana's assessment under the third review. Now, as the IMF mission begins a third assessment of Ghana's program, Professor Pipra believes passing this review is critical for the economy.
Comes to the indicative targets, that is the international reserves, the balance of payments, the primary balances, all those quantitative figures. I mean, government is on course. But when it comes to the qualitative data, which is the structural benchmark or changes of the policy and other things, that is where government is lacking. So it's a mixed result for me, but knowing that, I mean, the most important thing is that quantitative will supersede the qualitative. Possibly IMF may grant that and then put in another timeline for government to meet in ensuring that these structural benchmarks are met.
This is still Business Live. We are back with more stories. Please stay. Good to see you again. The Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of Ghana has begun their regular meetings to review developments in the economy. The committee will also review the policy rate, which currently stands at 29% and should influence the cost of credit. Meanwhile, Managing Director of GCB Bank, Kofi Adumaku, says banks expect some marginal reduction in the policy rate by the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of Ghana.
Interest rates, we hope we see a drop. We've seen what the Fed has done. Does it affect us directly? Maybe no, but ultimately it does affect us the way things go. So the other banks, we are hoping interest rates will come down. We hope the Fed, we hope the MPC will drop interest rates. Inflation pressures are also seem to be reducing, and so we think we are getting into good space. And then if interest rates do come down, look, it's good for we the banks. Okay, I have so many customers I cannot bank today because interest rates are too high. Okay, but I'll be able to extend into that. I do believe that inflation will continue to come down towards the end of the year and into 2025. We'll see a much more stronger reduction in inflation, and therefore interest rates will also follow. I'm very confident that post 2024, going 2025, 26, I'm very confident that we will come back fully on track.
Let's now touch on one of our lead stories. Ghana retains its position as the 10th lowest fuel price in Africa in September 2024. This is according to globalpetrolprices.com. This comes after the continuous marginal reduction of fuel prices at the pumps. More in this report.
Its average petrol price of 98 pence per litre now ranks it 43rd globally, up from 45th previously. The country retains its 10th position in Africa, where Libya boasts of the lowest fuel price of 3 pence per litre. The prices of petroleum products fell between 2 to 4% for petrol, diesel, and liquefied petroleum gas from August 1st, 2024. This decrease follows the slowdown in Ghana's currency depreciation since July 2024, coupled with favorable international market dynamics. In Africa, Egypt and Angola secured second and third posts respectively, with fuel prices of 3 pence per litre respectively. Algeria, Nigeria, Sudan, Ethiopia, Tunisia and Liberia trailed behind in that order.
And to some other stories, the UK government is worried about the impact of small-scale mining in Ghana on the economy. Team leader for the UK Ghana Gold Programme, Chris Aston, tells Joy Business that efforts are being made to engage government to develop policies that are aimed at regulating the sector to avoid such activities, including money laundering and smuggling. He spoke on the sidelines of a meeting on policy reforms in mining governance with some major political parties. More in this report.
The UK Ghana Gold Programme aims to promote sustainable policies that will ensure that Ghana's artisanal small-scale mining sector is not open for financial crimes that may disrupt economic freedom of the country and neighbors. According to the group, Ghana is losing out on key areas in mining due to the lack of effective regulation and protection of the natural resource. The meeting with political parties is part of the objectives of the group to support the next government with policy programs that will safeguard the sector. Team lead Chris Austin has been speaking to Joy Business on why the meeting is critical.
The UK and Ghana have a strategic partnership where they work together on shared challenges and mutual interests. And that includes serious organised crime. The UK and Ghana, they feel that illicit finance, gold smuggling, gold-based money laundering are high priority threats across West and North Africa. And they're working together to try to tackle serious organised crime and individuals, companies, and sectors that are vulnerable to criminal exploitation. And that, of course, includes the artisanal and small-scale gold mining sector in Ghana. And that's where UKGGP comes in and supports that.
Extractive sector analyst and consultant for the project, Dr. Steve Mantiao, believes that the country will be making some progress if all the suggested policies are being implemented accordingly.
And the first point I make is the decentralization, which will lead to efficiency in the licensing regime, also in the regulatory regime. Again, the commitment, you'll find that both parties have committed to some financial intermediation in the sector. The NPP talks about setting up a mining development bank, which for me addresses the issue of financial intermediation. It is because of difficulty in accessing credit. That is why the Chinese and the Lebanese and the the Burkinabes are all getting into the sector. They pre-finance informally and then in return receive the gold and cross the border with it, with the state losing whatever fiscal revenues it could derive from it, because these golds are not leaving the country through the approved channels.
Various political parties were given the platform to present their policies for the artisanal mining sector if they win the next election.
Thanks so much for being part of Business Life for today. I am Pius Kojobaka. We have more stories for you on myjoyonline.com/business. Upward trend in T-bill yields to continue. Government to borrow 7.44 billion cedis this week. Also on that portal, Ghana records third consecutive trade surplus, but Q2 numbers decline marginally. That's according to the Ghana Statistical Service. You have more stories on that portal. Also on that portal, crisis looms as Ghana faces waves of strike by unions. And Jerry Afolabi, why change of government is necessary to reset the Ghanaian economy. Also on that portal, when you come to the energy space on that portal, you will see Ghana retains 10th lowest position with the lowest fuel price in Africa. We brought you that story on Business Life. Got more stories for you when you log on to myjoyonline.com/business. See you at 8 p.m. with Prime Business.